Balasan placed both hands firmly on the table and leaned in, his stare sharp and demanding as he tried to draw Vikir's attention. Vikier, seated across from him, didn't respond, his silence calm, almost cold. The atmosphere shifted. The surrounding students froze, their gazes locking onto the two of them. Tension rippled through the room like a drawn blade. Balasan's furious expression deepened as he clenched his teeth. With a voice low and taut with aggression, he repeated the question: was Vikier the strongest among Colosio Academy's first-year students? Vikier remained composed, showing no sign of panic. Moments later, Balasan slammed his elbow onto the table with force, the sound sharp and deliberate. He lowered himself into the seat across from Vikier, eyes burning with contempt. He proposed a challenge, an arm wrestling match without mana to test Vikier's true strength. Still silent, Vikier stared down at the table. He didn't move. He didn't answer. Balasan's expression twisted with arrogance, mistaking Vikier's quiet for hesitation. He sneered and accused him of being afraid. If that was the case, he said, Vikier could just admit it. There would be no shame. In fact, he'd be quite impressed if this was truly the level of strength Colosio Academy claimed as its best. Sanko, Bianca, Piggy, Sinclair, and Tudor all reacted at once, their eyes blazing with fury. Their glares locked onto Balasan. Tension crackled in the air until someone finally intervened. Dolores stepped forward, her expression sharp with displeasure. She placed her hands firmly on the table, her presence commanding the room, her gaze locked onto Balasan's, intense and unwavering. She made it clear there would be no inter-academy conflicts before the tournament. Her words cut through the rising heat of the moment like a blade. Only then did many of the onlookers recognize her properly, Dolores, the president of Colosio Academy's student council. The atmosphere began to settle. With a cool finality, Dolores told them all to quit the childish posturing and focus on what mattered. If they truly wanted to prove themselves, they'd better sleep early and be ready for the tournament. At that moment, a broad-shouldered man approached, his presence immediately drawing everyone's attention. He rested a firm hand on Balasan's shoulder, noting the tension in the air with casual amusement. Glancing toward Dolores, he remarked on the youthful energy, suggesting that a bit of conflict might make things more interesting. It was Jurassico, the president of the student council from boot camp Varangian. Balasan turned to see who had spoken, and his eyes widened in confusion and awe. Dolores's gaze snapped toward him, her eyes widening in disbelief. She hadn't expected this. Next to her, Vikier sat unmoving, observing the scene with his usual composed detachment. He recognized the man instantly. Standing with hands braced at his waist, Jurassico regarded Dolores calmly. Balasan, he observed, had wagered both his own name and the honor of the Varangian boot camp's first-year class by challenging Vikier. Surely the strongest first year of Colosio Academy should be free to answer. His tone brimmed with good-natured excitement, clearly eager for Vikier's acceptance. Vikier remained silent, weighing the situation. Dolores met Jurassico's gaze, replying that under the current circumstances, a duel simply could not proceed. Jurassico's grin only widened. Resting a reassuring hand on Balasan's shoulder, he gestured toward the eager Varangian with a thumb, noting that the young warrior was desperate to prove his strength. Balasan snorted, hot breath curling like smoke, still itching to lock arms with Vikier. He even points across the hall towards Bianca, Sancho, Tudor, Piggy, and Sinclair bristled in unison. Insults directed at themselves they might endure, but none would allow their friend to be slighted without answer. Dolores admitted with a heavy tone that even she could sense how eager the others were to see Vikier display his strength. Around her, his companions clenched their fists, their stares locked onto Balasan with sharp, unblinking intensity. The weight of their expectations hung in the air. Watching them, a flicker of concern crossed Dolores's face. Her eyes narrowed and, with a tense breath, she hesitated. If she used her authority now, forced them to back down, it might undermine the morale of Colosio Academy's first years on the eve of the tournament. Yet, as student council president, the safety of her peers came first. Vikier watched her quietly, curious about what she would decide. As if sensing her dilemma, he lifted his head, his eyes gleaming faintly. Then, without a word, he turned and fixed a silent, unwavering gaze on Balasin. Jurassico chuckled and casually threw his arm around Balasin's neck. With a grin, he murmured something under his breath, convinced that Vikir's silence came not from calculation, but fear of getting hurt. Jurassico assured that his junior would go AIS. His words, however, sent a flash of uncertainty across Balasin's face, the younger warrior suddenly unsure of the stakes he had set. Across the table, Vikir's thoughts drifted to memories of Jurassico from his previous life. He was one of the great heroes of mankind's allied forces. During his time in Varangian, he fought with the Fourth Years because they bullied him for his parents being born in the forest. That was how he conquered his school and became a famous legend. This clash resulted in other students having strong solidarity with Bakuraga. Since then, he wasn't looked down on but acknowledged instead. Dolores stepped back, studying Vikier in silence, weighing the mood. Jurassico, still resting a broad hand on Balasin's shoulder, waited wordlessly for Vikir's reply, the hall falling into a tense hush around them. Vikier lowered his gaze, silent for a moment, then gave a small nod. He would accept the arm wrestling match. At his answer, Jurassico closed his eyes and burst into hearty laughter, overcome with excitement. In his enthusiasm, he accidentally pulled Balasin into a headlock, squeezing him so tightly that the younger student yelped in protest, flailing as he begged for help. Dolores, watching the scene unfold, turned to Vikier with a furrowed brow and asked if he was truly certain. Vikier rose to his feet slowly, his expression unreadable. He knew this would draw attention, perhaps more than he liked, but he said nothing, quietly considering the weight of the moment. If he let himself become fixated on trivial matters, he knew he'd lose sight of what truly mattered. Vikier kept his gaze lowered for a moment, then slowly lifted a hand and pointed, not at Balasin, but at Jurassico. Calmly, he stated that he wanted to arm wrestle Jurassico instead. A stunned silence followed. Confusion spread like wildfire. Eyes widened. Whispers broke out. No one could quite process what they had just heard. Balasin's face twisted with disbelief and rising fury. His clenched fists trembled at his sides as he growled that he was supposed to be Vikir's opponent. Even Dolores's jaw dropped. She stared at Vikier in stunned silence, unsure what to say. But before tension could escalate further, Jurassico stepped forward. With a glint of exhilaration in his eyes, he extended his hand, and a broad, eager smile broke across his face. Balasin stepped back, confused, a flicker of fear creeping into his eyes. He couldn't understand what Vikier was planning, but Vikir's expression had hardened. Quiet, steady, and resolute. Jurassico caught the shift instantly. This wasn't a bluff. Vikier was serious. With a glint of excitement, Jurassico let out a breath and lowered his elbow onto the table. A surge of mana rippled off his body, pressure thickening the air around him. Yet he wore a wide, almost thrilled smile as he accepted the challenge. Vikier mirrored the motion, calmly setting his elbow down and gripping Jurassico's hand. The table creaked under the weight of their combined presence. Dolores moved to stand beside them, her expression sharp and composed. "The rules are simple," she said, her voice cutting through the silence. "Victory, defeat, or surrender. Those are the only outcomes." Around them, the room fell still. All eyes locked on the table. Determination burned on both sides. Vikier braced himself, ready to take on Jurassico. Dolores kept her gaze fixed on him, concern etched deep in her eyes. She quietly warned that she would halt the duel at any sign of injury. The two locked hands firmly, and Dolores signaled them to prepare. Suddenly, Vikier began to push with surprising force, catching Jurassico off guard. His eyes widened in surprise, uncertain of what was unfolding. A thrill sparked on Vikir's face. At Dolores's signal, the duel officially began, and both surged with power. Jurassico soon gained the upper hand, but Vikier stayed focused, determined not to lose this match. The crowd erupted in cheers, their excitement palpable. Nearby, one of Jurassico's men rested his hand under his chin, puzzled. He had expected Vikier to fall quickly, but was stunned that Vikir's body could withstand Jurassico's might. Another man's eyes widened in disbelief. He suspected Jurassico wasn't using his full strength, afraid of breaking Vikir's arm. With eyes blazing with determination, Balasan clenched his fist and shouted for Jurassico not to hold back. Piggy placed his hands on top of his head, worry etched across his face for Vikier. Sinclair's eyes widened with both surprise and concern. Unsure of what was unfolding, Tudor's gaze grew sharp with astonishment. He had recognized Vikir's strength during the match in Nefali, but never expected him to withstand Jurassico. Sancho stood in shock, unable to believe the sheer power Vikier possessed. His curiosity piqued. Tudor studied the scene closely and remarked that if Jurassico was taking this seriously, Vikir's victory might truly be within reach. The arm wrestling match intensified, and Jurassico clenched his teeth with fierce resolve, refusing to lose to Vikier. Dolores watched intently, frozen in place. Jurassico's hand began to tremble, and he clenched his teeth tightly, unable to believe just how strong Vikier was. His eyes widened in disbelief. Initially, he had planned to end the arm wrestling match by carefully controlling his strength. But the moment he gripped Vikir's hand, his thoughts shifted. He pictured Vikir's muscles pulsating with mana, imagining the strain running through his triceps and shoulders. He noted how the shape of Vikir's hand was perfectly set to maximize the power of his forearm muscles. Despite being ahead in the weight category himself, Jurassico realized that Vikir's technique operated on a completely different level. In that moment, he envisioned himself trying to drag an immovable mountain, like pulling a vast rocky mass with sheer force. His face glistened with sweat, yet he wore a determined smile. The way Vikier wielded his power reminded him of a seasoned veteran who had endured countless battles. He saw in Vikier a depth of experience comparable to his own father's and wondered how that could be possible. Curiosity surged within him, eager to uncover who Vikier truly was. Vikier lowered his gaze toward the ground in silence before speaking in the language of the Balak tribe, revealing that he was a hunter. At this, Jurassico's eyes widened, filled with a mix of fear and surprise, shining brightly. Vikier locked his gaze on Jurassico and declared his identity as a hunter of the Balak tribe. No longer holding back, Vikier unleashed his full strength, slamming Jurassico's hand down against the table with such force that smoke began to rise. Jurassico clenched his teeth tightly while Dolores covered her face with her hands, uncertain of what was unfolding. Confusion spread through everyone's eyes as a sudden dust storm rose, obscuring the scene completely. When the dust finally settled, the broken table lay shattered. Vikier was on the ground, and Jurassico stood nearby. No one could tell who had won. Jurassico glanced down at his hand with a puzzled expression just as Vikier, seated on the ground with a serious look, quietly admitted defeat. The crowd erupted in cheers, applauding Vikier for his resilience and for holding his ground against someone as powerful as Jurassico. Jurassico clenched his fist tightly, fully aware that Vikier had deliberately let him win. He then approached Vikier, whose gaze locked onto him, eyes beginning to shine. They shook hands and, in the language of their tribe, Jurassico acknowledged that Vikier was the pride of the deep forests. His eyes gleamed with joy as he vowed never to forget him. With a smile, Jurassico grabbed Vikir's arm and raised it high, praising Vikir's incredible strength for having withstood his power. Vikier remained silent. Nearby, Sancho's eyes lit up with happiness, a broad smile spreading across his face as he recognized the bond of true friendship forming between the two men. Tudor crossed his arms and couldn't help but smile. Jurassico was impressive, a true man in his eyes. Piggy clenched his fists, his eyes gleaming with excitement as his heart raced. He couldn't wait for the tournament day to arrive. Night had fallen and, with the burning passion of warriors, the first evening before the competition drew to a close, the air thick with intense heat. Finally, the day of the Olympia survival competition had come. Inside the tower, the management office of the Magic Tower was bustling. At the head of the round table sat an elderly man, the master of the Magic Tower. The long white-bearded elder gently stroked his beard and spoke, expressing how honored he was to welcome them all for this year's competition. Across from him sat a woman with striking purple hair. She was Hippolyte, the headmaster of the Misjira, and beside her sat a man with a scarred face, the chief of boot camp Varangian, Vashilios. Also present was Professor Morg, the deputy principal of Colosio Academy. They were all gathered around a glowing hologram. The long white-bearded elder thanked everyone for coming to the magic tower and expressed his sincere gratitude. Hippolyte pointed at the hologram with a sharp finger, remarking on how incredible the magic tower's spare eye always was. Vasilios couldn't help but smile, knowing he could observe all the students within. With a warm smile, the elder confirmed this, explaining that the hologram displayed the activities of all 400 students. Red dots flickered across the map, revealing this year's survival competition battleground, the enemy, and the Le Rouge at Le Noir Mountain. Everyone watched intently, wondering how the students would survive in such a hellish map like this. Meanwhile, Vikier, somewhere in the mountain, had monsters already looming closely behind him.
Thanks for watching the latest part from the voice of Manhwa. Subscribe for more content and don't forget to comment below what you want to see in the future. Like and share for more.